So I just watched the face-off between Franklin and Moses. So I watched the face-off, and here are my observations, and here is my perspective. So the very first observation comes from Franklin. He talks about having his boxing business in order. So he's talking about business. The way I translate this is that he has negotiated the price that he wants for the fight. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. A boxer with good business acumen is great. So, and in a sense, to elaborate further, life is what you negotiate, not necessarily what you're worth. So it's good to know that Franklin has his business in order with regards to this fight. Now, Moses Itauma, he spoke about who chose this fight. And according to him, it was his coach that chose his fight. And he sets the context that he was chasing the fight. And I assume the right grammar here would be they, because he represents him and his coaches, and they collaboratively made that decision. And when asking Franklin, and there were some good questions that were asked in this face-off, when asking Franklin if there was any hesitation, was there any hesitation to accept the fight? His first answer was no. But then when he elaborated, he stated that the business has to be in order. So it seems to me that Franklin and business, there's an important relationship there. And again, that's not a bad thing. It's quite clear that the business is so important to Franklin, and hopefully he has that same passion. Hopefully he has that same passion for the boxing. Now, the context is important, because the context here is what type of Franklin is going to turn up, because that could dictate not only the outcome of the fight, but the process of the fight, on whether it's going to be competitive or whether it's going to be another reflection of what's been happening with Moses Itauma's career. So will Franklin turn up hungry and ambitious? Because if he does, I think he could be a very dangerous fighter. Or will he come either lacking ambition, a bit subdued? Clearly only time will tell. Now, what was interesting in this face-off was that Franklin and Moses, they were really complimentary about each other. And that's not typical of all face-offs. The first thing that comes to mind when I think of disrespectful face-offs is the David Haye versus Vladimir Klitschko. And David Haye was really disrespectful, and that created a very entertaining spectacle. But this was different. Both fighters were complimentary. But what was interesting about this face-off is that there was a part where Moses gives an insight. Moses Itauma gives an insight into his boxing decision-making. So he states that his team, starting with Frank Warren, the promoter, presents 10 to 12 boxing names. So 10 to 12 boxing names will be selected. And then his team, which I'm assuming means his boxing trainers, will then select 3 to 5 boxers from those 10 to 12 names. And then Moses will come in for the selection process. So what does this mean? It means that decisions are made tactically. So there's clear tactical awareness, and there is a collaboration. It's like a 3-phased collaboration process, which involves Frank Warren, the boxing trainers, and Moses Itauma. So this to me suggests that Moses Itauma really trusts his team. And I think trusting your team is an essential and valuable thing in boxing. Moses again is complimentary to Franklin, stating that he may be his toughest fight. This gives respect. Franklin states that he has issues with the boxing media. The critical thing here is why. Why does he have issues with the boxing media? Does he feel that there's a qualification issue, that they're not credible to speak about him? Or does he feel that people are misrepresenting his talent or misrepresenting his ambition? In a sense, Franklin does show some motivation and purpose, because if he feels rattled or if he feels disrespected by the boxing media, this could be some extra motivation to put in a really good performance. When it comes to the body language, I couldn't take much from the body language of both fighters. For example, Franklin seems composed, but Moses Itauma also seems composed, but there's a bit of an edge to him. Franklin also seems a little bit non-engaged, but not in a sense that he's nervous or scared, but he just seems a little bit dismissive in his body language, while Moses Itauma seems more intimate in the moment, for a want of a better word. Anyway, there are some good questions presented to Franklin. And here is an interesting perspective. Here is an interesting perspective that Franklin shared, that he is a student of the game. He is a student of the game, meaning that he watches opponents and he watches what they do well and how they react under pressure. So he's studying their bad habits and how they move, etc. Boxing, as I've stated previously, a lot about boxing is about the nuances. So the fact that he acknowledges the nuances is important. He also acknowledges that boxers change in the process of camp. So this is a good understanding. This is a good philosophical understanding of the science of boxing. So considering this, if we take this at face value, we expect Franklin to have studied Moses Itauma. Franklin also seems calm and intelligent. Here's another question. Is Moses feeling the pressure? I mean, he's the hot prospect. He's expected to win. Maybe the better question may be, how does he react to the pressure? He reacted sensationally in the Dillian Whyte fight, but will he be able to duplicate that performance? And will Franklin represent the same type of opposition that Dillian Whyte represented on that day? Moses, if we listen to what he says, is expecting a hard fight. Is that some type of psychological play, or is he simply being honest? Moses states that no one can beat him on his night, and he gives credits to his team. That's good, that Moses seems to understand the importance of a team that's humble and that's intelligent decision-making. Of course, when you think of the team, there's various moving parts. There's the strength conditioning coach, the cut man, the sparring partners, the trainers, the assistants, the nutritionists, the boxing environment cultivated, the management, the promoter, etc., etc., etc. So as we know, boxing teams, they're important. Boxing is mostly considered an individual sport, but there's a team behind you, and that team is essential to your development. And Moses Itauma acknowledges that. I don't know too much about Jermaine Franklin's team, but I want to deflect, or I want to make a transition. I want to make a transition into another topic and ask this question. Is Jermaine Franklin a dangerous opponent? Is he a dangerous opponent? And I would answer that question this way. Whether he's a dangerous opponent depends on which Jermaine Franklin we get, because there's different versions of Jermaine Franklin. And this could be the difference between getting a competitive fight to getting, a reflection of what we've had in the past with Moses Itauma's performances. So let's look at the best Franklin that I'm aware of. And I would say the best Franklin that I've seen was against Dillian Whyte, because he was very defiant, but he was more than just defiant. For example, in round 5, Dillian Whyte started throwing those body shots. And in his prime, Dillian Whyte could really get some meat onto those body shots. Those body shots are dangerous. And then he was starting to throw the left hook to the temple, which is a dangerous shot. But in fairness, not only did Franklin take those punches, he absorbed those punches, showing that he's got good chin, good punch resistance. But then in the same round, in round 5, he started to get off his backhand. So he was utilizing the jab, getting off his backhand. And then he started to get into emotion, and he landed like flurries of punches. He landed combinations, and these were combinations that represented punch creativity, punch innovation. So in that fight, he was courageous, he was technical, he was competitive, he was motivated, he was dangerous, and some people thought he won that fight. So that version of Franklin, that's dangerous. Now we get another version of Franklin, which is still a good version, but some would argue, is it as good as the Dillian Whyte version? Again, that's a subjective opinion, but that's the version against Anthony Joshua. And again, here is some important context. Anthony Joshua, when he fought Franklin, was training under Derek James. Great trainer. But this was a defensive-minded AJ. What would have happened if he fought an offensive-minded AJ? Would he have been knocked out instead of going the 12 rounds? Or would there have been more counter opportunities and more opportunities to get into the fight? Again, this is all objective opinion at this point. But what is not objective is that Franklin was defensive. He was very defensive in this fight. In one sense, he was defensively sound, but he took less risks. So he took less risks in this fight than he did against Dillian Whyte, and he was comprehensively beaten. Now, Jermaine Franklin in this fight, he needed to change the gears. But he didn't. And the question is why? So to me, both those fights reflect different performances. But I would argue that both of those fights reflected good performances. Each Jermaine Franklin, or the Jermaine Franklin of Dillian White and the Jermaine Franklin of Anthony Joshua, those versions of Jermaine Franklin will present a significant challenge, because you look at the credibility of that opposition. He effectively had good performances against a former title contender and a former two-time champion, a former two-time heavyweight champion. So the credibility of those performances is high. And this, to me, if he can replicate those type of performances, that will make him very tough opposition. Here is a genuine question. Has Jermaine Franklin progressed, or has he gone backwards? Has he progressed, or has he gone backwards? Now, I've seen some recent performance, and on the surface, they don't look impressive. Has Jermaine Franklin really been perfecting the craft, or is he simply just getting by? Maybe, just maybe, my observations are unfair. Maybe there's some context that I'm not aware of. Maybe there's some context, injuries, personal struggles, etc. But to me, in the fights that I've seen, there just looked like a lack of ambition. But maybe that's because of the opposition, or maybe there's some additional context, some additional variables. Maybe that's because the business wasn't in line. To me, Jermaine Franklin needs to get back to that Dillian White performance. In that performance, he showed good boxing intelligence, at times controlling the distance, good punching innovation, and he showed character and heart. If that Franklin turns up, we may get a great fight. But to summarize, the face-off showed respect. It showed respect between two warriors. But if Franklin can rediscover his potential, there is, I believe, serious danger. There is serious danger. Now, the cards are in Moses Itauma's favor, of course, but the variables of boxing mean the outcome is never guaranteed. Now, that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. So that means I'm interested in your comments, I'm interested in your questions, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, all you have to do is simply like and subscribe. And if you want to watch more content like this, simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated. Peace.